Hello and welcome to TCS World Travel's Discovery Series. We are happy to have you join us today as we embark on a virtual journey with award-winning travel writer Andrew Evans. Andrew is a beloved on-trip expert with TCS, and this is his third webinar presentation with us. Today, Andrew will explore the natural wonders, the people, language, and hidden treasures that make Iceland so special. He will be in conversation with TCS's own Susie Lukács, and they will have a fascinating program planned for us today. My name is Brooke Galloway, and I've been with TCS for just over 8 years, and I joined Susie on our business development team. I'd like to cover a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. First, please turn the volume all the way up on your device when you're listening in. Second, your audio automatically muted when you joined us, but you can reach out to us in real time by using the Q&A box found on the bottom of your screen. Please click on that button and type in any question or concern for us, and we will respond during the broadcast. Your submissions are completely private, visible only to TCS staff. Please use this, especially if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, and we have staff ready to support any of those issues. Your screen should currently display the presenter box that says TCS World Travel with gorgeous Icelandic mountains behind of it, as well as the presentation box. The presenter and presentation boxes are resizable and movable. Click the ribbon at the top of the boxes with your cursor to move them or to resize them to make them fit to your particular screen. Please take a minute to configure these boxes to best fit on your device. And while you're doing that, please note that on the bottom of your screen to the right of the Q&A box is the resources button. If you click on that button, you will find TCS journey itineraries and travel information. These are all downloadable during the broadcast. To the right of the resources button is the speaker bio, where you can learn a little bit more about Andrew and his background. Similarly, we will be sending out 2 polling questions during the event today. You will see those appear in the TCS presenters box. These are simple questions, and really they do help inform us. And we're going to send the first question out now so you know what to expect. There it is. Have you ever traveled with TCS or one of our partners, such as Four Seasons, before? Just a quick yes or no. And I see there are already responses coming in. Thank you so much. And while you're doing that, finally, I just wanted to say to the right of the speaker bio box, there's a survey that you can take anytime, either during the presentation, after the presentation, and it will also be emailed to you. But we encourage you to take just a few minutes to fill this out and to help us plan future events like today. And without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce my colleague, Susie Lukács. Susie is a director of business development at TCS. She began her professional life as a foreign service officer with the U.S. Department of State with a commitment to international cooperation and global exploration. At TCS, she continues this work through our richly curated educational and immersive travel experiences. And now over to you, Susie.
Thank you so much, Brooke. As Brooke mentioned, I have been working my entire adult life to expand and advance the understanding of different cultures around the globe. TCS shares this commitment, and we provide our guests with a robust enrichment program on every journey. One aspect of that is working with phenomenal experts to curate relevant and engaging content, which is delivered through a variety of avenues on our trips and now through these webinars. For today's webinar, we brought back one of these exceptional experts to explore Iceland, an island lying on the geological border between North America and Europe. It is a place where vivid contrasts are found in climate, geography, geology, and culture. To help us understand the unique and fascinating aspects of this destination, We will be speaking with award-winning travel writer, TV host, Iceland guidebook author, and most importantly, beloved TCS on-trip expert, Andrew Evans. Andrew's work has taken him to all 7 continents and over 100 countries. By sharing his expertise and experiences, he inspires the explorer in all of us. Andrew's passion for meaningful travel is clear in his work, his words, his sense of humor, and will no doubt be part of the conversation today. Welcome back, Andrew. We are thrilled to have you joining us.
Thank you, Susie. I'm thrilled to be back.
Well, thank you so much. I know that Iceland is near and dear to your heart. You've been there over 20 times. Your guidebook is in its 5th edition. So I'd like to jump right in with some questions for you. My first question is, you refer to Iceland as a living landscape. And if you could please help us understand what you mean about that, both above and below the surface of the island.
Sure, of course. And I can begin by just showing you this picture I shot just a couple years ago off the west coast of Iceland. And the name Iceland, when you talk about the surface, yes, you get ice, but that's not all. And it's not all still. Only about 11% of Iceland is covered with ice, and it's never still. It's always in motion. It's always in flux. So that's why I call it a living landscape. It is a dynamic country because beneath you have the heat of the earth, the magma. It's a hot spot that's erupting, like this volcano, Hekla, in the south of Iceland, which is one of the most active volcanoes on Earth. Hekla has erupted over 20 times over the last 10 centuries, and it's an impressive volcano. It's not that high. It's a shield volcano. It's about 5,000 feet above the surface of the water, and you can see when it erupts that the lava just kind of seeps out of it. It's a classic volcano in that it kind of blows up and then goes back to sleep again. The last eruption was in 2000. So when you think about Iceland, you have to think about a little spot on the Earth where everything that's happening below the surface is on the surface. And that's because Iceland is really right on the mid-Atlantic ridge. So you have so much going on in the middle of the ocean, and Iceland is the part of the ocean that's got pushed up to the surface. So in a way, it's like looking at the seafloor itself. So the original Icelanders believed that this was really an entrance to hell because it was so fiery and so hot and bursting through the snow and ice. And when you drive across Iceland, or even better, when you fly over the top of it, you can see all of these different lava landscapes, the different lava flows where they've met, and you can even date them by specific eruption. So I shot this flying over the interior of the country, and I want you to think of Iceland as kind of an overturned dish. So the middle of it is quite high. It's an Arctic desert. It's very dry in the middle because no water stays there. It all runs off the side, and people tend to visit the outside around the coast, but this is the middle, and it's very interesting. It's very hard to get to, which is why flying over it is such a great view, because you see these little fumaroles, you see these vents where steam and magma have come out. Now, because it is such an active country, a lot of the areas are off limits, they're uninhabited, but so much of it is accessible that you wouldn't be able to access elsewhere because of the coastline. And I feel like when you go to Iceland, you're going back in time. You're seeing the way the earth was created. You're seeing landscapes that maybe we didn't see, but maybe our ancient ancestors saw. This formation here is kind of classic West Iceland. I shot this picture in the West Fjords. You get these thick layers of basalt. Each one of these is a volcanic event that's laid down and cooled very slowly, these big flat layers of basalt, and it's called cake layer basalt because it looks like that. And then in between you have this softer, redder, oxidized iron stone, and these all stack up. And then the ice and the erosion and the wind and the rain, all of it just slowly carves the rock away, and you get this kind of poetic formation on the side. You also get classic textbook geology. There's my background is in geography, and there are schools that send their kids on field trips to Iceland because in Iceland you can see things that you really can't see anywhere else. It's so accessible. So this is a kind of classic U-shaped valley where we have the volcanic rock that's here, we have the ice pressing down, and it's carved out this U-shaped valley and then pressed even deeper and cut out this channel into the sea. It's a fjord. And the definition of a fjord is that the part below the water is as deep as it is high above the water. So this is a fjord that U-shape continues underneath. So when you visit Iceland, you have to think of things not as static, but as creative forces. The lava, the ice, the wind, everything is shaping the landscape while you are there. And nothing is more impressive than the waterfalls in Iceland, because there are thousands of them. And there are hundreds of them that are very famous that you can hike to, like this one, Dynjandi. Dynjandi in Icelandic means thunder, thundering. And it really is. You can hear it from 10 miles away. You can hear this waterfall coming down. You can see these cake layer basalt right here where the water is just tumbling down like a staircase. And you go up and it's not particularly high, but it's a young waterfall in geological terms. And when I said this cake layer basalt is young, what I mean is it's only been exposed from the ice in the last 8 to 10,000 years. So since the last ice age. So when you go to Iceland, not only are you going back in geological time, you're seeing what a lot of Europe and a lot of the rest of the world look like in prehistoric times. And again, it's accessible. You can hike these landscapes. You're not just seeing them off in the distance. This waterfall, Gullfoss, is one of my favorites. Gullfoss means golden waterfalls. All the names in Icelandic are poetic. They were all named by Vikings who saw things and named immediately. They were all about improv. The first thing that popped into their mind. So this is Golden Falls. It's very interesting. It has these triangular cascades that fall down. You can hike right up to it. And this is the Kvitá River. Kvitá means white because it's tumbling down, and it just tumbles down with the seasons. In summer, it's just gushing and rushing with water from the melted glacier runoff that's coming through. And I love this waterfall because it's not that far from the capital. It's about a 2-hour drive. And even though it's not as high or as impressive as some of the other ones around the country, it has a really beautiful story. Every Icelander has their own little spot that they go to, and this one was on the land of a farmer named Tómasson. And some British developers came to him a century ago and said they wanted to buy it from him so they could turn it into a hydroelectric dam. And his response was, I can't sell my friend. And that's why we still have this waterfall today. And it shows you a lot about who the Icelanders are and how they respect the forces of nature. Water in Iceland is so pure, and it is one of the creative forces there. So I want you to imagine this ice that's on top of this shield, this plate in the country, that's being pushed down, that's melting down, it's filtering down through the volcanic rock, and it ends up in a freshwater lake like this one at Þingvallavatn in southwest Iceland. It is some of the cleanest water that I've ever been diving in. This is me diving. The water is about 1 degree Celsius, so that's about 33, 34 Fahrenheit, very, very cold. I'm wearing a dry suit, and I'm at about 60 feet deep. But when I say it's clean and clear, the visibility under this lake is about a mile. So I could see a mile underwater. It's clearer than looking at in the air. And on top of it, it's the only place in the world where I could remove my regulator and drink in the water. That's how clean it was, and then put it back in and breathe. But not only that, and not only is Iceland like going back in time, it's like being at the bottom of the ocean, because right here in this picture, I'm suspended between 2 continents. I'm in the middle of the mid-Atlantic ridge. So on one side, I have the North American continent, and on the other, I have Eurasia. And this is divergent seafloor spreading, where the 2 different continents are pulling apart. So Iceland is expanding by about 2.5 centimeters a year. And you can see this in person. And even if you don't want to get in the water like I did, you can actually drive to various parts of Iceland and be in the middle of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and you can see the 2 sides and how they're moving apart. So it's like going back in time. It's like being at the bottom of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, except it's on the surface. And this is the only place, really, aside from the Great Rift Valley in Africa, where you can see this kind of geology. And that really reminds you that Iceland is alive. For those who don't know, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, imagine the Earth has a big zipper down the middle, and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is at the bottom of the Atlantic, and it's where we really discovered plate tectonics, where the plates are being pushed apart and the Earth is expanding. And all of these things, when you begin to see them and understand them and appreciate them, you realize that yes, it's alive, and on top of it, the weather in Iceland makes it even more alive because it's constantly changing. You're at the top of the Atlantic, right below the Arctic weather patterns mixing with the Atlantic. So the weather's changing by the minute. It can be a beautiful sunny day, and the next there's fog so thick you can't see your hand in front of you. I shot this picture again in the West Fjords, one of my favorite areas. You see these big cake layer basalt cliffs. You see this mist coming in. About 4 minutes later, you couldn't see anything. It just totally disappeared. And when you live in a country where things can change that quickly and that dramatically, you have to be prepared for it. And that's why in Iceland, you have these emergency huts painted fluorescent orange that are all over the country. There's over 150 of them, and they're equipped with blankets and food and water. And when the weather gets bad and you need shelter quickly, you're allowed to go in and seek shelter, and there's a radio there to contact help. It's against the law to use them for any other purpose. But this is how the Icelanders have survived in their own country, because they know they have to be prepared. And so this is something you'll see throughout the landscape, knowing that you're always safe if you need to seek shelter.
Wow, Andrew, how fascinating. I mean, I think we could use the whole program today to go into the landscape and the dynamic changes that are going on at all times. But I'd like to pivot now and dig into a little bit of the culture and the people and what makes them so unique in Iceland. And so if you can please share with our audience what it is that makes the people of Iceland so special.
Well, I'm glad you asked. I love the Icelanders. I consider the whole nation friends of mine. I've learned so much from them. I've been fortunate to be traveling there. My first trip was in 1999. And I've gone every year since. And I've learned so much. And I learned so much from their literature. Because when you read Icelandic literature, this is old. This is very, very old. We're talking about the sagas, which took place between the 9th and 11th centuries, were finally put down into paper in the 12th and 13th centuries. And the settlement saga about the origin of Iceland talks about a character named Floki, and they call him Floki Raven, and I'll tell you why. He sailed from the west coast of Norway. He was a classic Viking, so they all left this west coast of Norway. They were headed out looking for new places, and he head west, and he had 3 ravens on his open ship. Imagine your classic Viking ship, a Nor is what it's called. It has a sail, and people are also rowing it, and they were just out in the North Sea, not a pleasure cruise by any means. And he released a raven up into the air, and it flew back to the Faroe Islands where they had left. A few days later, he released a second raven, and it went straight up, and then it came back to the ship because it didn't see any land. And then the third raven he released, after a few more days, head forward to Iceland and led him there. And Floki landed on the west coast in Breiðafjörður, or Broad Fjord. And it's actually a very shallow bay that's been carved out by the ice. And we have the actual sentence where Iceland gets its name from this saga. We say, Floki climbed a high mountain, and north of the mountains was a fjord filled with icebergs. So they called their land Iceland, as it had been called ever since. So this is where they get the name, and it is, again, a very kind of classic Viking cultural tradition to see something and name it immediately. Iceland had had other names from other explorers that had come, but this one stuck because Floki stayed. He got trapped there over the winter. His ship got trapped in by the ice, and he went over the mountains to look. This is my Icelandic friend Dini looking out of the window at the icebergs coming in. But to clarify, and the reason why Iceland has a little bit of a misnomer, is that this ice is not from Iceland. This ice is from Greenland. And it's flushed across the Greenland Channel into these bays in Iceland. So even though Iceland gets named with the ice, I just want to clarify that this is where it comes from, because Iceland and Greenland have these currents that are running into each other. We have the Gulf Stream that's sweeping up from the Gulf of Mexico, all that warm water that's going up the west coast, and then it kind of steers away, which is why you can't swim in Massachusetts and Maine. It's too cold, because at that point the Gulf Stream has cut off and goes straight up to Iceland. I have been swimming in the ocean in Iceland. It's cold but bearable. The Greenlandic current comes down from the North Pole, and it's about 10 degrees Celsius lower. So in just a few miles, and I've sailed across it, the water temperature, the current drastically changes. And this is why Greenland, even though it isn't green in places, is still covered with an ice sheet, and why Iceland actually has fairly moderate weather given its place on the globe. This is what made Iceland habitable. And it's why after Floki, a whole group of Vikings began to emigrate and settle in Iceland. There were a lot of political problems. I won't get into medieval Norway, but they were escaping a totalitarian king, and they set up their own farms. This is a turf longhouse in the north of Iceland. And the Vikings and the Icelanders have lived in these kind of turf houses protected from the elements for centuries. And you can still visit farms where they have the original turf houses. You would have a whole extended family and their workers that were living here. Icelanders are very hospitable. So if you arrived, you would be invited in and kept dry and be fed and taken care of. Now, the Icelanders as an ethnicity, as a people, are entirely unique because even though they have such a prominent heritage from Norway and the Norse, and they are Vikings in that regard, they are a mix. Because once they began to settle Iceland, they would go on raids and trading missions, and most of them went south to Ireland. And in Ireland, they tended to, in addition to trading and raiding, collected a lot of women, specifically the ruling women, the ruling class, the princesses and queens of the Celtic tribes in Ireland, and they would bring them back. There were a lot of Irish slaves that came back. So Icelanders today, if you fast forward 1,100 years, are a perfect hybrid between the Celtic and Norse ethnicities, and they're very tightly knit. There's a reason why in Iceland it's the first place we were able to map the human genome, because it's one of the few places where we have such clear family records, and we can match the science with the history. That's also true with the Icelandic book. This is something that I don't think can exist in any other country. It is a website in Iceland. You have to have an Icelandic social security number to log on, and you can put your name and any other Icelander's name in there, and it will automatically tell you the degrees of separation and how close you are related. So this is the big joke. When you start dating somebody in Iceland, you go here first and you put in both of your names to make sure you're distant enough to date. But this is how closely related the population is. The population today is about 330,000. They're beginning to have non-Icelandic immigrants who move in, but when you immigrate to Iceland and you become a citizen, not only are you expected to learn the language and take a test, you also have to adopt an Icelandic name because their names are so unique and they want to keep that heritage. That heritage, that sense of tradition is important to them, even for their animals, because Icelandic horses, which are now famous the world round, originated in this landscape. These are horses that were brought over from Norway that have that kind of working body structure, but they've evolved in Iceland. They've developed this very, very heavy coat that they put on in winter that keeps them warm. They are very strong. They can deal with this terrain. They can deal with all of that changing weather. I took this picture of this horse in May, and around this time in June, they begin to shed all of that heavy hair and they become much sleeker. They're very fast runners. For those of you who are horse people know the Icelandic horses have another gait called the tult, which is after the canter, and it's very interesting. I've done it before, but really the horses are just stories unto themselves. This is a breed of horse that has remained pure for over 1,100 years. Once an Icelandic horse leaves the country, they're not allowed to come back in because they've kept the genetics so pure for so long. The same goes for the sheep. And sheep are really how the Icelanders have survived there. The whole country is a free-range sheep farm. The sheep population fluctuates between about 500,000 to 800,000 versus 330,000 Icelanders. And the sheep are, again, this old Norse breed that comes from the old world. Some of them even have these Neolithic genetics. And I love the sheep there. You'll see them in this time of year when they've all been released. They're all over the mountainsides. You see their little white dots everywhere. They're birthing all the lambs. And you see this healthy mother with her 2 newborn lambs that follow them around. And they're all just ranging around, eating grass, getting fat. And in September, everybody goes back home. It's like Thanksgiving. You go back to the family farm. You suit up on your horse. You head up into the mountains on horseback. And you collect all of these sheep and you run them down back to the coast. And this is when we have the réttir, or the roundup. And everybody helps out. It's a big festival. Everybody gets in there. This girl is about 8 years old. She jumped in the middle. The sheep are just crushing you. And you go through and you're separating out all the sheep. You're finding which ones belong to which families. The réttir means a wheel because they have a stone wheel that the Vikings used to build that's like this. Then they're able to separate them out into the various families' pens. And then afterwards, you eat lamb stew. People drink a lot. It's a big festival at the end of the summer. So this closeness with wildlife, the seasons, the reliance on nature is something that separates Icelanders, they feel, from other places because they are so fiercely independent. And also, I would just mention their language, because their language is so unique. It is a very ancient language. Icelandic is really no different than what we call Old Norse, which was the original language of the Vikings and even older back in Scandinavia. They brought that with them. This is the language the sagas is written in, so that Icelandic children today who can read, age 6 and 7, can read the sagas, which are 1,000 years old. And that is remarkable. But we shouldn't be so scared as English speakers when we see Icelandic words, because even though it seems impossible, there's so many cognates because our own language was influenced heavily by Old Norse. And this is just an example. This is the modern Icelandic sentence, "Þú ert hér," and that letter, the thu, which is a soft th, we used to have in Old English a long time ago. But that just means, translated literally, "thou art here," which in our language means "you are here." Anyone who's read King James English or Shakespeare realizes that how our own language has evolved. So English is very young, compared to Icelandic. And that is something you have to appreciate when you go there, that Iceland is not just what's being defined as Icelandic. Yes, it's a Christian nation, so we have the cathedral there from Reykjavik that is, a sign of Christianity, and it has been a Christian nation in principle for the last 1,000 years. But there are much deeper pagan and Old Norse roots that are still evident today, because right across from this cathedral, we have the Althing, which is the Icelandic parliament. And in this window, we have a dragon, which is one of the Vetir, one of the guardian spirits that protects the coast of Iceland, no different than the dragon head on the Viking ship that used to come, that we always know the Vikings for. And everything there is symbolic. So when you read these cues, you begin to understand what makes Iceland and what makes it different. The flag of Iceland has this Dannebrog cross, which is no different than in Denmark or Sweden, and it is a sign of Christianity. But the colors, the blue for the ocean, the white for the ice, and the red for the fire, really speaks to the natural elements that make this country so special.
Well, Andrew, my goodness, I thought the geology was fascinating. The history, the culture, the people are clearly just as fascinating. And you have certainly moved Iceland up on my list of places to visit as soon as possible. So thank you very much for that. And I'm not the only one. We've seen a growing interest and awareness in Iceland as a travel destination. And yet for all that attention, I'm wondering, especially based on your knowledge and expertise, what do outsiders sometimes miss or appreciate when they travel to Iceland?
That's a good question. I think there's been so much interest in Iceland, and I think we often run the risk of falling into these particular ideas about a place for which it's famous. But something I wish people appreciated more in Iceland is that it can be so sunny and so full of light and so beautiful, especially this time of year. From now really into the fall, Iceland is full of sunshine, and there's so much to do outside. And it's a country that really needs to be experienced outside to really appreciate it. This picture I shot in the north of the country, which ironically has better weather than the south because the wind just keeps pushing everything out. So you have these fields of lupins, these flowers everywhere. You see the greenery. Iceland can be very, very green in summer. All those sheep are going to be dotting the mountains. And it's remarkable to see how far up this mountain those sheep will climb. And the Icelanders love good weather. They are not dreary people. They love to be outside. They love to experience nature. And this is a classic Iceland summer vacation. They rent a cottage way out in the countryside. They get away from Reykjavik, from the noise, and they just soak up the sun and breathe the fresh air and swim in the water. And that's something that I think often gets lost by outsiders because we may not have that same culture. Iceland has the highest number per capita of swimming pools in the world. There's over 200 public swimming pools. And even swimming pool is a bit of a mistranslation because it's the way that Icelanders see it is just a place to go soak in nice, clean, warm water. They have all the clean, warm water they want because it's a geothermal heated country. It has incredible number of renewable energy. It's a carbon neutral country already because they have all this geothermal activity that's going on. So all of this clean water is heated, it's brought up, and it's put into these public pools. This one is in Hofsås, in one of the northern fjords of the country. So you have this ice cold fjord, and then right here, a hot pool that you can go to and swim in and soak in. And this is really what Icelandic adults do instead of going to happy hour after work. They say, hey, I'll meet you at the pool, and then they go and they soak and they chat. And this is kind of where community happens when you live in a rural area. So it's something I always encourage visitors to do, is make sure you bring your bathing suit and plan on soaking in one of the hot pools that's there. Also, that Iceland is full of wildlife. I think people think of mammals, and yes, Iceland has the Arctic fox, which is its only native mammal, but it has so many birds. And these birds are very special, and they've come from very far away. The Arctic tern, this one here, it flies. It really just looks like a white handkerchief in the air. It has come all the way from Antarctica, and it has flown all the way up to these rocky beaches in Iceland, and it lays its eggs really just right on the pebbles. It's not a very sophisticated nest, but then they guard the eggs. And so if you come anywhere close to a nesting site, you will be attacked by one of these Arctic terns. They swoop in, they peck you on the head. So when you see Icelandic children walking in summer, or even when they're going to and from school and the birds have already come back, they'll hold big sticks or even their books on their head. And that way the Arctic terns just peck the stick or the books. And these terns, when their round trip migration journey is almost 19,000 miles every year that they fly back and forth. So just seeing these birds and knowing where they came from is amazing. And so many different birds, like the eider duck. And the eider ducks were they're native, but even the Vikings valued their soft down, and it's considered one of the warmest natural fibers is eider duck down. So here's a little eider duckling that I saw coming out of the water and shaking off all of the water and seeing its preen itself. And this down, and the down of the male eider duck, he's pulling out these feathers to make a nest for his ducklings, is incredibly valuable. The Vikings collected it all through the Middle Ages. They collected it. To this day, farmers collect it by hand, and then they have to clean it by hand and pick it apart, so that 1 kilo, about 2.2 pounds of eider duck down, which is how much you need to fill a duvet, costs about $10,000. That's the price of Icelandic eider duck down, and it's incredibly warm. This is a traditional Icelandic wedding present. You buy a comforter for a newlywed couple, and they will have that for life, and it's what they will sleep with, and the whole family can stay under it. It's warm. And it's so fun to see the kids going around and collecting this down. This tradition continues to this day. And then my favorite bird of all are the puffins. They do look clown-like. They look very cheerful. They're actually very rigorous and gregarious birds. They spend most of their life way out in the ocean. And 60% of the world's Atlantic puffin population breeds in Iceland. So in summer, they come back from being out at sea. They nest atop these very high cliffs. And you have to really come out at night to get this close to them. I shot this picture after midnight. It's a few minutes after midnight. The midnight sun is real in Iceland, starting from about right now, going into August. It's so light outside. This puffin can dive about 45 or 50 feet deep in the water, catches these little eels and brings them back to feed the chicks. And the chicks are these big, gray, fluffy balls, and they're stuffed into these burrows that are dug by the puffin's feet. So the chicks are stuffed in the back of them, and the puffins feed these chicks until they finally have to learn to fly, but they're at the top of a 1,000-foot high cliff. This is in Lauterbjörg. So it's perfect territory and landscape for these birds, and I've just inched to the very edge to get this picture. So I think it's important to not think of Iceland as a dreary place, but very vivacious and alive and colorful and full of art. Because if you think about a country that does have bad weather, where you do have to be inside a lot, where you have long, dark winters, you have to think, how do people, entertain themselves? And so Icelanders are very musical. There's incredible musicians there. There's wonderful writers. 10% of the Icelandic population will publish a book in their lifetime. It's one of the most literate societies on earth. And they're also wonderful artists. One of my favorite Icelandic artists is Louisa Matthíasdóttir, who was from the north of Iceland, lived in Reykjavik, eventually came to New York in the 40s and 50s and really became part of the avant-garde scene all over the world, but is a classic Icelandic artist in that she's painting Iceland. This scene is something you could see in a photograph. These horses we talked about, how green it is, the blue, the mountains and the shade of the mountains. This scene as well, the colors of Iceland are very vibrant. And I love Icelandic art because it speaks to something that's deeper there, that says we are a world apart from everybody else. We are different, we're unique, and we're proud of what we have. And that even gets interpreted in the architecture. When you walk through the streets of Reykjavik, you see some kind of classic Scandinavian things. You see mimicking European or American styles, but the Icelandic architect that is probably most pronounced in Reykjavik is Samuel Guðjónsson, who studied in Copenhagen way back in the 20s and 30s, and he had adopted a lot of these Art Nouveau and Jugendstil forms that he had seen in Europe, but then he tried to adapt them to be more Icelandic. His dream was to create a unique Icelandic architecture that was totally independent of anything else. And this is one of his latest works, even though it began in 1937, he didn't finish it. And it was finished posthumously in 1986. This is Hallgrímskirkja, which is on top of a mountain in Reykjavik. You can see it from everywhere. And you can see the classic form of the cathedral. And it is a Protestant / non-denominational cathedral where you can go and hear organ recitals. But this style of architecture is Guðjónsson trying to mimic the basalt that I talked about at the beginning, the volcanic crystallization of the rocks. And when you see this building in real life, it feels that way. It feels like you're looking at one of the cliffs or the volcanoes of Iceland. You see the ice, you see the glacier in the architectural form. So that's really what I want to present to you today, is that Iceland is alive. It is not just a list of sightseeing things to go and see and do, or we have to do these 5 things. It's hard to reduce Iceland to any kind of list. It is very much an experience. It is a living place, and above all, it is an emotional destination, because when you go to Iceland, it's not just what you see, but when you feel. Like this moment, I remember shooting this picture just 2 summers ago when I'm sitting on the coast and everything's fine, and then this mist begins to roll in and all the birds come out, and then it just becomes so quiet. And that's why I love this place, and that's why I'm thrilled to talk about it whenever I can. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you so much. Your enthusiasm for the country is palpable. And you have pushed Iceland up to the top of my list of places that I want to visit. When you were speaking about the geological formations, it was so fascinating, and I just wanted to keep going on that. And then you went into the culture and the history of the people, and then that was equally fascinating. And now the art, it just looks incredible. And I'm just so grateful for you joining us today and sharing all of this great knowledge that you have about the place. I do want to send out one last polling question to the audience right now. Are you planning to travel internationally in the next 12 months or so? My computer is not sending it out. I don't know why. But, all right, we'll move on from that and go back to move on. Oh, now it just went. Thank you. Are you planning to travel internationally in the next 12 months? Please answer yes or no, and your answers are already coming in. Thank you so much. And we're going to move on to the Q&A section. And we have had some questions that have come in this morning during the broadcast. So I'm going to jump right to the first one, and it is, what's the most surprising change you've seen in Iceland over your 20+ years of visiting there?
Wow, well, there have been a lot of changes. You know, it's a very old place, but a lot has happened in the last 20 years. My first visit there, there were less than 100,000 tourists a year who came to Iceland. And that was 22 years ago. And then, you know, recently they had 2.5 million visitors in 1 year. So that's a drastic change. It's become a major tourist destination. A lot of people are coming, so they've had to adapt to that infrastructure. So that's been a big change for me. But that said, it's very easy to get away from there. You know, most of Iceland is empty, which is why people are traveling there. They want to experience that big empty nature, and that's still available.
Well, that's great. We have another question that's come in. What are Iceland's renewable energy goals? And I think that's a question, we know that Iceland's on the forefront of renewable energy. So if you could share any information about that, that would be appreciated.
Well, there's a lot there, and that for me is always exciting to see how they're using technology. But really, this is they've been doing this from the beginning. I mean, Reykjavik means Smoky Bay, and it was named that by the Vikings in 874 AD because the steam, where they call out smoke, was coming out of the ground. So they settled a place where they had natural heat, and they've harnessed that. And so now it is a carbon neutral country. They produce more energy than they use. I think there is a goal to have completely eradicate combustion engines at some point. But the entire country is heated and electrified by renewable resources, energy already. They use a lot of hydroelectric, because if you think about the amount of ice that's melting in all those waterfalls, that's being used all over the country. They've really harnessed the geothermal. So you have a large aluminum industry in Iceland that moved there because aluminum requires a lot of electricity, and it is so inexpensive and clean to run this amount of electricity in Iceland. So they really are kind of showing the rest of the world how to do it, but they also have an unfair advantage where, you know, they're living on a volcanic hotspot, which helps.
Yeah, and there aren't so many people there. That helps too. What about the impact of climate change? Is there a significant impact on any of their future with climate change?
Well, I think the Icelanders are talking about that. I think it's important to them. They're talking about, you know, what a fragile balance their nature has always lived in, this rare balance. All of these forces I'm talking about, I think they're concerned about what would happen if more and more of the ice melted. There's been a lot of the glaciers that are receding. So I know that's always a topic of conversation. And they want people, I think part of the interest in going to Iceland has been people wanting to see these effects, close up, because they're very visible in Iceland.
Mm-hmm. To change topics, we have a question about what about Iceland's claim about being the first democracy?
Yes, that's a good question. The Icelanders do claim that they're the first democracy. They kind of ignore ancient Greece. And they're using that claim because when they left Norway, they were under a king. When they arrived in Iceland, they said, we don't want to be subservient to anyone else. So you had these Viking farmers that were in different regions. And in the end, they got together, and there were 39 districts, and each one elected somebody called a Goðar, which is like a chieftain. It was an elected position, and they would represent that region, and they would gather near that waterfall I showed you, the Gullfoss. There's a place called Þingvallavatn in the same area with the lake where I was diving. And Þingvellir is a natural volcanic valley. And this is where they set up really their parliament, the Althing. And the Althing that was set up there was established in 930 AD. So Icelanders claim that was the foundation of Icelandic democracy, was in 930 AD. The Althing met every summer in June and July for about 6 weeks. So everybody would get together. It was a big fair. You would trade horses, and you didn't have a king. You had somebody called the law reader, and he was elected, and it changed every few years. And his job was to memorize the law of the land, and he would read it out loud from memory from on top of one of these rocks. And then if they had to add any laws, or if there were any disagreements, this is the place that it all happened. And it's in one of these parliamentary meetings outdoors in this setting in Althing that they decided that they would be a Christian nation, that they needed only one religion, and there was this constant battle between the pagans and Christians. But it was very much an Icelandic political event, because the answer was, we're going to be a Christian nation, but if you'd like to worship your pagan gods, that's fine, just do it in secret. So it was really, when you look at history, Icelanders were looking at practical compromises, and that's how they stayed independent for so long.
And it speaks to their resiliency as well. And we have time for one more quick question, and I think this one is is very interesting. I didn't know this. What about the Iceland currency? It's based on what exactly?
Well, Iceland is very interesting to study and to explore when you think about a nation state and how the rest of us in our various countries run things. Because in Iceland, when you arrived there, there was no money. Everything was a barter economy and trade. Eventually, it became an important fishing destination later on in its history. When we think about the Grand Banks and the cod fishing that was there, that was a reaction to what was happening in Iceland, because cod fishing really was the whole industry, especially saltfish, where this was how they preserved it back in the 16th and 17th centuries. They'd split open the cod, they'd salt it and open it and dry it on the beach. And the salt cod is what is on the 1 krona coin to this day. And then there's other fish that are there. It's on the emblem of the country, because originally the krona, or the crown, the currency was pegged to the fish stock up until very recently. So as a currency, the Icelandic krona was pretty volatile, very inflationary, because it all depended on how many fish were caught and exported that year. And as the fish stocks are variable, so is the currency. I think they're a little more sophisticated now in keeping their currency stabilized. But originally it was pegged to the cod. Yes.
Okay, that is fascinating. Oh my goodness. Andrew, thank you so much today. This has been so extremely informative and interesting, and you've certainly helped me understand why you are so enthusiastic and passionate about this country. And it has propelled it to the top of my list of places to go to, especially this summer. We're quickly running out of time, and so I'm going to send it back to Brooke to wrap up our broadcast this morning. Again, Andrew, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Andrew and Susie, for enlightening us today. You've brought to life why so many of us love to travel to places like Iceland. And for me, finally answered that question, if Iceland is green and Greenland icy. So very exciting. We thank you so much. Just for our listeners, you can download more information about our upcoming Iceland journey from the resource section of the webinar. And please reach out to us at TCS or your travel advisor if you have any questions. Remember to let us know what you thought of our presentation today by completing the survey on this page, which will also be emailed to you afterwards. And of course, a big thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today and your interest in learning more about the history of some of the world's most iconic destinations, such as Iceland. Like all of you, we are eager to get back out in the world and explore this amazing planet. Until we do so, please continue joining us for our expert-driven discovery series. Watch out for emails for your next invitation. And most importantly, stay safe, be well, and thank you again for being with us today. Take care.